The office Christmas party at Nakatomi Plaza was in full swing. Glittering decorations adorned the expansive space, and festive music filled the air. The company's employees mingled and laughed, their glasses clinking in celebration of another successful year. It was a night of joy and camaraderie, a time to forget the stresses of work and enjoy the company of colleagues and friends. John McClane stood by the entrance, taking it all in. The grandeur of the event was impressive, a far cry from the modest Christmas gatherings he was used to back in New York. Waiters circulated with trays of hors d'oeuvres and champagne, and a large Christmas tree twinkled with lights and ornaments. The atmosphere was electric, charged with the holiday spirit. John's eyes scanned the room, searching for his wife, Holly. She was the reason he was here, the reason he had flown across the country. As he moved through the crowd, exchanging polite nods and greetings, he finally spotted her near the center of the room, engaged in conversation with a group of colleagues. Nakatomi Plaza was a marvel of modern architecture. The sleek, glass facade of the building reflected the city lights, making it appear as though it was shimmering against the night sky. Inside, the design was just as impressive. High ceilings, polished marble floors, and elegant decor created an air of sophistication and success. As John wandered through the building, he couldn't help but feel a sense of awe. The plaza was not just a workplace, it was a symbol of ambition and achievement. Every detail, from the state-of-the-art security systems to the meticulously maintained indoor gardens, spoke of the company's dedication to excellence. John took the elevator to the 30th floor, where the party was being held. The doors opened to reveal a breathtaking view of Los Angeles, the city sprawling out beneath him in a sea of lights. For a moment, he stood there, taking it all in. Despite his reservations about being here, he couldn't deny the beauty and grandeur of the place. As John approached Holly, he could see the surprise and relief in her eyes. She excused herself from her colleagues and walked over to him, her smile warm but tinged with uncertainty. "John, I'm so glad you made it," she said, reaching out to touch his arm. "Yeah, well, I figured it was about time we spent a Christmas together," John replied, his tone light but his eyes serious. "You look great, Holly." "Thanks," she said, glancing around the room. "This party is something else, isn't it?" "Yeah, it's pretty impressive," John agreed, though his mind was more focused on her than the festivities. As they talked, the underlying tension between them became more apparent. It had been months since they had last seen each other, and the distance had taken its toll. Holly had built a new life for herself in Los Angeles, complete with a successful career and new friends. John, on the other hand, had remained in New York, clinging to the familiar routine of his job and his city. "I missed you, you know," John said softly, his eyes searching hers for a response. "I missed you too," Holly replied, her voice equally soft. "But things have been different here, John. I've had to adapt, to find my own way." "I get that," John said, a hint of frustration creeping into his voice. "But it feels like we're living in two different worlds." Holly sighed, looking down at the floor. "Maybe we are. But that doesn't mean we can't find a way back to each other." Before John could respond, a colleague called out to Holly, pulling her back into the party. She gave John an apologetic smile and promised to be back soon, leaving him standing alone amidst the revelry. John watched her go, his heart heavy with the weight of their unresolved issues. As he stood there, the festive atmosphere of the party seemed to fade away, replaced by the stark reality of their situation. He knew they had a lot to work through, but for now, he was just grateful to be near her, hoping that this Christmas would bring them closer together. The sound of laughter and music filled the air as the office Christmas party continued in full swing. Unbeknownst to the revelers, a sinister plan was unfolding beneath their feet. A group of armed men, led by the charismatic and ruthless Hans Gruber, made their way into the Nakatomi Plaza, blending seamlessly with the bustling city outside. Dressed in suits and carrying sophisticated equipment, the terrorists exuded confidence. They moved with military precision, taking advantage of the building's security gaps. As they approached the main lobby, one of them, a hacker named Theo, began tapping away at a computer terminal, disabling the building's security systems and locking down the elevators. Within minutes, the terrorists had gained control of the ground floor, their presence still unnoticed by the partygoers above. Hans Gruber stepped forward, his eyes cold and calculating, as he addressed his team. "Remember, we are professionals," he said in a calm, authoritative voice. "Follow the plan, and everything will go smoothly. Let's proceed." As the clock struck 8, the terrorists executed their plan with ruthless efficiency. Theo's hacking skills ensured that the building's alarms and communication systems were disabled, cutting off any chance of outside interference. The terrorists swiftly took control of the building's critical points, including the security room and the power grid. On the 30th floor, where the party was in full swing, the atmosphere suddenly shifted. The lights flickered, and the music stopped abruptly. Confusion spread through the crowd as people exchanged worried glances. The confusion turned to fear as armed men stormed into the room, their faces masked and their weapons drawn. "Ladies and gentlemen," Hans Gruber's voice rang out, commanding attention. "Your attention, please." The room fell silent as Hans stepped forward, his presence exuding a chilling calm. He smiled, a predator surveying his prey. "My name is Hans Gruber. I am here to discuss the future of Nakatomi Corporation. If everyone cooperates, this will be a simple exchange. If not, there will be consequences." The initial shock of the takeover gave way to panic. People screamed and tried to flee, only to be stopped by the terrorists, who corralled them into a central area. John McClane, who had been in a restroom when the takeover began, emerged to find the party in chaos. Instinctively, John assessed the situation, his training kicking in. He saw Holly among the hostages, her face pale but composed. His mind raced, weighing his options. He knew he had to act quickly, but rushing in without a plan would only get him and the hostages killed. As the terrorists secured the room, John slipped away, moving silently through the building. He needed to find a way to communicate with the outside world and get help. His mind was a whirlwind of thoughts and emotions, but one thing was clear: he had to stay one step ahead of the terrorists. In the lobby, Hans continued to address the hostages, his tone eerily calm. "Please, remain calm. This is a simple matter of business. We have no intention of harming anyone who cooperates." Meanwhile, John found a secluded spot and pulled out a radio, hoping to contact the police. He took a deep breath and began to transmit, keeping his voice low and steady. "Mayday, Mayday. This is John McClane. I'm at Nakatomi Plaza. We have a code red situation. Terrorists have taken over the building and are holding hostages. I repeat, we need immediate assistance." As he waited for a response, John could hear the distant sounds of the terrorists consolidating their control. He knew he had to act fast. The lives of everyone in the building, including Holly, depended on his ability to outsmart and outmaneuver the terrorists. Back on the 30th floor, the hostages huddled together, their fear palpable. Hans Gruber's men patrolled the room, their eyes vigilant. Holly caught sight of John slipping away and felt a glimmer of hope. She knew her husband well enough to trust that he was already working on a plan to save them. The tension in the room was thick, the air charged with fear and uncertainty. The hostages' fate now rested in John's hands, and the clock was ticking. John McClane's heart pounded as he crept through the dimly lit corridors of Nakatomi Plaza. He had to find a way to disrupt the terrorists' plans without being seen. He moved silently, relying on his training and instincts. Every step was calculated, every corner approached with caution. He knew the terrorists would soon realize they weren't alone in the building. In the chaos of the takeover, John had managed to evade capture, but he knew his luck wouldn't last forever. He needed to stay one step ahead. As he made his way to the stairwell, he heard voices approaching. He pressed himself against the wall, holding his breath, listening. "Check this floor," one of the terrorists ordered. "We can't have any surprises." John waited until the footsteps faded before he slipped into the stairwell. He ascended quietly, his mind racing. He needed to find a way to level the playing field. As he reached the 32nd floor, he decided it was time to strike back. John moved cautiously through the empty office space, his eyes scanning for any signs of the terrorists. The sound of muffled conversation reached his ears, and he followed it to a nearby conference room. Peeking through the glass door, he saw two terrorists rummaging through desks, searching for something. Taking a deep breath, John readied himself. He knew he couldn't afford to hesitate. In one swift motion, he burst into the room, his weapon drawn. "Freeze!" he barked. The terrorists spun around, surprised. One of them reached for his gun, but John was faster. He fired a shot, hitting the man in the shoulder. The second terrorist lunged at John, and a fierce struggle ensued. They grappled, knocking over chairs and scattering papers. John fought with everything he had, using his training to gain the upper hand. With a final, decisive move, he subdued the terrorist, knocking him unconscious. Breathing heavily, John looked at the two incapacitated men. He needed to act quickly before more terrorists arrived. He grabbed their weapons and radios, stashing them in a nearby desk drawer. Then, he took a moment to gather his thoughts. The initial confrontation had gone better than he expected, but he knew the real challenge was just beginning. Realizing the need for a strategic retreat, John slipped out of the conference room and made his way to an unfinished floor higher up in the building. The floor was dark and abandoned, with exposed beams and construction materials scattered around. It was the perfect place to hide and regroup. John found a secluded corner and took stock of his situation. He had managed to disable 2 of the terrorists, but there were still many more to deal with. He needed to gather information and find a way to communicate with the outside world. He also needed to stay hidden until he could come up with a plan. As he settled into his hiding spot, John listened intently to the radio he had taken from the terrorists. He heard Hans Gruber's voice, calm and commanding, giving orders. "Report, Carl. Have you found him?" "Negative," came the response. "But he's here. We'll find him." Hans's voice took on a steely edge. "Make no mistake. This man is not to be underestimated. Double your efforts. We cannot afford any mistakes." John grimaced. He knew they would be coming for him with increased determination. He had to use his knowledge of the building and his wits to stay ahead. He began to formulate a plan, considering his options. In his hiding spot, John felt a mixture of fear and resolve. He was alone against a highly organized and dangerous group, but he couldn't afford to fail. Holly and the other hostages were counting on him. As the night wore on, John prepared for the battles to come. He was in enemy territory, outnumbered and outgunned, but he was not outmatched. With every breath, he reminded himself of his mission: to save the hostages and stop the terrorists. And for that, he would need to be smarter, faster, and more resourceful than ever before. John McClane's mind raced as he set his plan into motion. He knew that to disrupt the terrorists' operation, he needed to be both elusive and effective. Using the building's layout to his advantage, he moved through the shadows, making use of every nook and cranny. The unfinished floors provided the perfect cover for his guerrilla tactics. His first move was to disable the terrorist surveillance equipment. John made his way to the security room, where he had previously taken out a couple of terrorists. He retrieved the security feed monitors and cameras from the room's storage closet. By using a portable device he had found, John managed to create a blind spot in the building's security system. This would make it harder for the terrorists to track his movements and coordinate their actions. John then set about creating a series of diversions. He rigged a few fire alarms to go off on different floors, creating confusion and chaos among the terrorists. The alarms blared intermittently, causing the terrorists to scramble and investigate, leaving some of their posts unguarded. With each diversion, John was able to slip through the building, planting traps and setting up obstacles. John's next objective was to cripple the terrorists' operational capacity. He knew the terrorists had taken control of the building's power and communication systems, which they were using to coordinate their movements and manage their demands. He made his way to the building's electrical room, carefully avoiding patrols and using the darkness to his advantage. Once inside, John began to sabotage the power grid. He cut a few crucial wires and rerouted others, creating electrical faults that would cause random outages and fluctuations. The aim was to create a sense of unpredictability and disrupt the terrorists' control over the building. John also accessed the communication systems, where he discovered the terrorists were using encrypted radios to relay their instructions. Using the equipment he had commandeered from the earlier skirmish, he began to scramble their communications. The terrorists' attempts to contact each other were met with static and interference, further disorienting their coordination efforts. As the night wore on, John knew he needed more information to effectively counter the terrorists. He began systematically gathering intel on their numbers, locations, and plans. He intercepted radio communications, piecing together bits of information about their objectives and key figures within the group. John discovered that Hans Gruber was not just a ruthless leader but a strategic mastermind. His plans involved not only the immediate takeover but also a sophisticated scheme to escape with a substantial amount of money and valuable assets. Gruber's demands were a mere distraction. His true goal was to execute a meticulously planned heist. John also learned that the terrorists had a number of hostages, including Holly, secured in a vault on the 30th floor. The vault was heavily guarded and fortified, making it a high-priority target for John's rescue mission. He made a mental note of the security measures and the number of guards stationed outside. With this newfound information, John developed a clearer picture of the terrorists' operational structure and their weaknesses. He knew he needed to use this intelligence to his advantage. He planned his next moves carefully, aiming to exploit the gaps in their security and disrupt their plans further. As he continued to navigate the building, John was acutely aware of the stakes. Each decision and action had to be precise, each maneuver carefully calculated. The terrorists were ruthless and well organized, but John was determined to outsmart them and ensure the safety of the hostages, especially Holly. In the midst of the chaos, John McClane remained focused on his goal. He was fighting not just for survival but for the lives of those trapped in the Nakatomi Plaza, and he was ready to do whatever it took to bring the terrorists' plans crashing down. In the dimly lit corridors of Nakatomi Plaza, John McClane knew that establishing contact with the outside world was crucial. He had managed to cause enough chaos to disrupt the terrorists' plans, but he needed external help to fully neutralize the threat. With the building's communication systems compromised, he had to rely on whatever resources he could find. John scoured the building for a working phone or radio. After several tense minutes, he stumbled upon a secure phone line in an abandoned office on one of the upper floors. He quickly dialed 911, hoping to reach emergency services. As the line rang, John's anxiety grew. He had no idea how much time he had before the terrorists would realize he was causing trouble. Finally, a voice answered on the other end. 911, what's your emergency? This is John McClane, NYPD. I'm at Nakatomi Plaza in Los Angeles. Terrorists have taken over the building and are holding hostages. I need immediate assistance, John said, his voice steady but urgent. Sir, can you give me more details? How many terrorists are there? How many hostages? John provided as much information as he could, detailing the terrorists' numbers, their leader, and the hostages' locations. He tried to keep his explanations clear and concise, but the situation was rapidly escalating. While John was trying to communicate with the outside world, his call was routed to the local police precinct. There, dispatcher Al Powell was on duty. Al was a seasoned officer known for his calm demeanor and sharp instincts. He had been working the late shift and was just beginning to settle in when the call came in. Al Powell, LAPD. We've received a call from someone inside Nakatomi Plaza claiming there's a hostage situation. Do you have any more details? Al asked, trying to piece together the information. Yes, it's John McClane. He says he's a New York cop. He's reporting terrorists have taken over the building, the dispatcher relayed. Al's eyebrows furrowed in concern. Okay, I need to get more information from this McClane. Send me the details, and I'll try to get him on the line. The dispatcher connected Al to John, and Al's voice came through the phone with a reassuring tone. McClane, this is Officer Al Powell. I'm going to help you. What's the situation? John quickly briefed Al on what he had learned so far. Al took notes, his professional demeanor providing a small comfort to John in the midst of the chaos. As John spoke with Al Powell, he realized that conveying the urgency of the situation was more challenging than he anticipated. The line was occasionally garbled, and Al's responses were sometimes delayed, adding to the frustration. McClane, I need you to stay calm. We're sending a unit to the building, but we need to know exactly where the terrorists are and what their demands are, Al said. I've told you everything I know. John replied, frustration seeping into his voice. They're holding hostages, including my wife, on the 30th floor. I need immediate action. Al tried to reassure John. We're doing everything we can, but we need to verify the details and get the right teams in place. Stay hidden and try to stay safe. John's patience wore thin. You don't understand. These guys are professionals. If we don't act fast, people are going to die. As Al and John continued their conversation, a sense of disbelief began to set in. Despite John's detailed descriptions and the urgency in his voice, Al struggled to convince his superiors of the gravity of the situation. The dispatcher's initial response had been met with skepticism, and the LAPD was hesitant to fully commit resources without more concrete information. Al knew that John's situation was dire, but convincing his higher-ups was proving difficult. He had to bridge the gap between John's urgent pleas and the slow-moving bureaucratic processes. In the meantime, John continued to work on his own strategy, using the brief moments of communication to gather as much information as he could. He tried to stay out of sight, moving carefully through the building and using the information he had gathered to plan his next steps. As the night progressed, John's frustration mounted. He was in a race against time, with the terrorists tightening their grip on the building and the hostages' lives hanging in the balance. The communication challenges only added to the urgency, but John remained resolute. He knew that every second counted and that he had to do everything in his power to save those trapped inside Nakatomi Plaza. John McClane's stealthy maneuvers had bought him some time, but his luck was about to run out. While sabotaging the terrorists' plans and gathering intelligence, John had inadvertently left behind some clues that pointed to his presence. A discarded piece of equipment here, a scuffled mark on the floor there, small but significant details that the terrorists began to piece together. On the 30th floor, Hans Gruber and his team were growing increasingly frustrated with the disruptions. Gruber's patience was wearing thin as Theo, the hacker, struggled to fix the communication issues John had caused. The terrorists began to realize that someone else was actively interfering with their operation. Report any anomalies immediately, Gruber commanded his men. We are dealing with a skilled adversary. He cannot be underestimated. As the terrorists conducted thorough searches and interrogations of the hostages, they uncovered more signs of John's interference. Their initial disbelief turned into suspicion, and soon enough, they began actively searching for the elusive intruder. The building was now on high alert, and the terrorists' focus shifted to locating and neutralizing John McClane. The atmosphere inside Nakatomi Plaza became charged with heightened tension. The terrorists, now aware of John's presence, intensified their search efforts. Their movements grew more erratic and aggressive as they conducted sweeps of the building. Each time John heard their footsteps or voices, he had to make quick decisions to stay out of sight. John knew that every second was crucial. The terrorists' increasing aggression meant that any wrong move could lead to discovery. He had to adapt his tactics, using the building's layout to his advantage. He set traps and created distractions to throw them off his trail, but the terrorists were becoming more adept at countering his efforts. In the midst of the escalating danger, John's own stress and exhaustion began to take their toll. The physical and mental strain was immense, but he remained focused on his mission. He knew that his actions could make the difference between life and death for the hostages, including Holly. Meanwhile, on the 30th floor, Holly Gennaro's situation grew increasingly precarious. The terrorists had confined her and the other hostages in a secure vault, guarded by heavily armed men. The vault's reinforced steel door and multiple layers of security made it nearly impossible for anyone to escape or even attempt a rescue from within. Holly remained calm, but her anxiety for her husband and the other hostages was palpable. She had caught fleeting glimpses of John's actions and had a glimmer of hope that he was working to save them. However, the terrorists' threats and the grim reality of their situation weighed heavily on her. Hans Gruber, in his quest for control, had become increasingly ruthless. He used the hostages as human shields, threatening their lives to manipulate the authorities and to try and flush out John. He made repeated, menacing announcements over the building's intercom system, detailing his demands and making it clear that any further interference would result in immediate consequences. Holly's resolve was unwavering, but she could see the fear in the eyes of the other hostages. The terrorists' threats became more frequent and brutal, and Holly had to maintain her composure to prevent panic from spreading. She found solace in the fact that John was still out there, fighting to save them. The tension in the vault was unbearable. The hostages huddled together, their fear and uncertainty palpable. Holly could only hope that John would find a way to reach them before it was too late. She knew that with every passing minute, the stakes were rising, and the danger to everyone in the building was becoming more imminent. As John continued to evade capture and the terrorists intensified their search, the situation inside Nakatomi Plaza grew more desperate. The stakes had never been higher, and every action John took could mean the difference between life and death for Holly and the other hostages. The battle against time and the relentless pursuit of the terrorists had reached a critical point, and the outcome remained uncertain. As the tension in Nakatomi Plaza reached its peak, the battle between John McClane and Hans Gruber became a high-stakes game of cat and mouse. Both men were skilled in their own right, but their styles of confrontation were as different as night and day. John, the gritty cop with a no-nonsense attitude, was up against Hans, the calculated and charismatic mastermind. Hans Gruber had always been a step ahead, orchestrating every move with precision. However, John's recent sabotage and guerrilla tactics had begun to disrupt Gruber's carefully laid plans. The terrorists' frustrations grew as their operations faltered and their communications were scrambled. Realizing that John was more than just a nuisance, Gruber decided to confront him directly. Through a series of strategically placed messages and taunts, Hans began a psychological battle, aiming to outwit his elusive opponent, Mr. McClane. Gruber's voice crackled over the building's intercom. "I must admit, I'm impressed. You've caused quite a bit of trouble for us. But let's not pretend you're in control here. The hostages are in our custody, and your little games won't change that." John, hidden in the shadows, listened to Gruber's taunts with a mix of frustration and determination. He knew that engaging Gruber in a battle of wits was essential to turning the tide. The game had escalated, and he needed to stay sharp to outmaneuver the formidable leader. Gruber's psychological tactics were as calculated as his physical plans. He used fear and manipulation to undermine John's confidence and to exert control over the situation. The intercom system was a powerful tool for Hans, allowing him to make public announcements and threats that kept everyone on edge. In one of his broadcasts, Gruber addressed the hostages directly. "Ladies and gentlemen, let me remind you that any further interference from Mr. McClane will have severe consequences. We have no intention of harming anyone who remains calm and compliant. But rest assured, we are fully prepared to take drastic measures if necessary." Gruber's voice was calm and soothing, a stark contrast to the gravity of his threats. His goal was to sow discord and fear, hoping to force John into a reckless move. The psychological pressure mounted, and John had to remain focused and composed. John responded to the psychological warfare by turning Gruber's tactics against him. He used Gruber's overconfidence and predictability to his advantage, setting traps and creating diversions that played on Hans's assumptions. John's knowledge of the building's layout and his understanding of the terrorists' behavior allowed him to exploit their weaknesses. With the stakes higher than ever, John McClane's tactics became increasingly sophisticated. He set a series of traps throughout the building to confuse and deter the terrorists. These traps ranged from simple physical obstacles to more complex setups that targeted their communication and coordination. One of John's most effective traps involved a series of rigged explosives. He placed them in strategic locations, creating the illusion of a larger threat. When the terrorists investigated, they encountered a series of controlled explosions that caused chaos and disorientation. John used this opportunity to gather more intelligence and to continue his sabotage. In addition to setting traps, John had to be exceptionally cautious to avoid detection. He used every ounce of his experience and training to remain hidden. He employed a mix of stealth, misdirection, and quick thinking to stay out of the terrorists' reach. His movements were precise, and he made use of the building's infrastructure to stay one step ahead. John's efforts paid off as he managed to thwart several of the terrorists' plans. His ability to evade capture while continuously disrupting their operations added to the mounting pressure on Hans Gruber. The battle of wits between the two men intensified, each trying to outsmart the other in a high-stakes game of strategy and deception. As the confrontation between John and Gruber unfolded, the tension in Nakatomi Plaza reached a fever pitch. The psychological and tactical duel between the two adversaries set the stage for a climactic showdown. John's determination to save the hostages and Hans's ruthless ambition created a volatile mix, making the outcome uncertain and the stakes higher than ever. As the situation inside Nakatomi Plaza deteriorated, the local police were mobilized in response to the urgent 911 calls. Officer Al Powell, who had been coordinating with John McClane from outside, worked tirelessly to escalate the situation within the LAPD. His detailed reports and the mounting evidence of the terrorists' activities finally convinced the higher-ups of the severity of the crisis. A police tactical team was dispatched to the scene. They approached Nakatomi Plaza with caution, establishing a perimeter and preparing for a potential rescue operation. Al Powell, stationed near the command center, provided real-time updates and briefed the team on John McClane's progress and the building's layout. The initial police response was cautious and methodical. The officers set up a command post across the street and began coordinating their efforts to ensure a well-coordinated entry. Al Powell, working closely with the SWAT team leader, conveyed critical information about the terrorists' numbers, the layout of the building, and the locations of the hostages. However, the response was hampered by a lack of precise information about the terrorists' capabilities and the building's internal security. The tactical team had to proceed carefully, knowing that any misstep could lead to disaster. As the situation escalated, the FBI was brought in to handle the crisis on a larger scale. The involvement of the FBI marked a significant shift in the response efforts. An FBI crisis negotiation team, led by Agent Johnson, arrived at the scene to take charge of the operation. Agent Johnson and his team quickly assessed the situation, liaising with local authorities and devising a more aggressive strategy. The FBI's expertise in handling high-stakes hostage situations added a new layer of pressure and complexity to the unfolding drama. The FBI's intervention brought additional resources and personnel, including specialized negotiators and tactical units trained for complex rescue operations. They set up advanced communication systems and began to work on a plan to breach the building and neutralize the terrorists. While the FBI's arrival brought hope of a more coordinated response, it also introduced new challenges. The presence of multiple agencies created a potential for miscommunication and coordination issues. The FBI and local police had to work together seamlessly to avoid conflicting actions and ensure a unified approach. Amidst the arrival of law enforcement and the increasing external pressure, John McClane faced a new set of challenges. His efforts to remain undetected and continue his guerrilla tactics were complicated by the escalating police and FBI activity. The terrorists were becoming increasingly paranoid and aggressive, making John's mission even more perilous. John's struggle to maintain control over the situation was evident as he navigated the chaotic environment of Nakatomi Plaza. With the police and FBI moving in, the terrorists' movements became less predictable. John had to adapt his tactics, carefully timing his actions to avoid interference from the incoming rescue teams. In a critical moment, John overheard the terrorists discussing their plan to detonate explosives and make their escape. He realized that the arrival of the police and FBI had made the situation more volatile, and he had to act quickly to prevent a disaster. He made a desperate attempt to communicate with Al Powell, using a makeshift radio he had rigged from stolen equipment. "Al, it's McClane. The terrorists are planning to blow the building. You need to get everyone out and find a way to disarm the explosives." John's voice crackled with urgency. Al Powell relayed the message to the FBI and tactical teams, but the complexity of the situation made it difficult to coordinate an immediate response. The FBI's focus was on a carefully planned breach, and any abrupt changes could jeopardize the operation. John's struggle to maintain control was marked by constant pressure and high stakes. He continued to set traps and create diversions, trying to buy time and keep the terrorists at bay. His physical and mental exhaustion was palpable, but his determination to save the hostages and thwart the terrorists kept him going. As the police and FBI coordinated their efforts to resolve the crisis, John McClane's role as a lone operative within the building became increasingly critical. The simultaneous efforts of the external response and John's internal sabotage created a tense and volatile environment, with every action influencing the outcome of the unfolding rescue operation. The stakes were at their highest, and the resolution of the crisis depended on the interplay of these competing forces. As the tension within Nakatomi Plaza reached its zenith, John McClane knew that the final confrontation with Hans Gruber was inevitable. The building was now a battleground of chaos and danger, with every move and decision critical to the outcome. John had been meticulously working to gather information about Gruber's whereabouts and the terrorists' plans. His guerrilla tactics had weakened their position, but Gruber remained a formidable adversary. The terrorists' plan to escape and destroy the building had become increasingly urgent, and Gruber's confidence was high, believing that he had the situation under control. The climactic confrontation began when John, having stealthily infiltrated the upper floors, came face to face with Hans Gruber in the building's rooftop office. The space, once a symbol of luxury and success, now served as the epicenter of the terrorists' operations. Gruber was calm and collected, his demeanor a stark contrast to the chaos surrounding them. He had taken refuge in the office, surrounded by stacks of stolen money and armed guards. As John approached, Gruber's sharp eyes narrowed, recognizing him as the persistent thorn in his side. "McClane," Gruber said with a sneer, his voice dripping with contempt. "You're quite persistent. But this is where your little game ends. The police and FBI can't save you now." John, exhausted but resolute, squared off with Gruber. "You're not getting away with this, Gruber. I'm here to end this." The tension between them was palpable. Gruber's charisma and calculated demeanor were matched by John's grit and determination. The two adversaries faced off, each aware that the outcome of this confrontation would determine the fate of everyone in the building. As John and Hans Gruber engaged in their final showdown, the rescue operation outside was reaching its critical moment. The FBI and police, having coordinated their efforts, prepared to breach the building and secure the hostages. Al Powell, who had become a crucial ally to John, played a key role in directing the rescue teams. Inside the vault, Holly Gennaro and the other hostages were held in a state of constant fear. The terrorists' threats had been mounting, and the situation had grown increasingly dire. Holly, maintaining her composure, continued to offer reassurance to the other hostages. Despite the mounting tension, the rescue operation finally commenced as the tactical teams, led by the FBI, stormed the building. They moved with precision, clearing floors and neutralizing terrorists as they advanced. Al Powell, who had kept in contact with John throughout the ordeal, guided the teams toward the vault. As the rescue teams approached the vault, Holly and the hostages could hear the sounds of their imminent rescue. The vault door, reinforced and secure, was being breached with specialized equipment. Holly's heart raced as she realized that help was finally at hand. The vault door was blown open, and the rescuers flooded in, quickly securing the area and ensuring the safety of the hostages. Holly, relieved and emotional, embraced the rescuers, knowing that the nightmare was finally coming to an end. With the hostages now in safe hands, the focus shifted to the final battle between John McClane and Hans Gruber. The rooftop of Nakatomi Plaza became the stage for their ultimate confrontation. The high-altitude location added an additional layer of danger to their battle. Gruber, knowing that his plan was unraveling, had become increasingly desperate. He and his remaining men engaged in a fierce exchange of gunfire with John, who used every ounce of his skill and resourcefulness to hold his ground. The rooftop became a chaotic battleground of flashing lights, gunfire, and shouts. John, using his tactical advantage and knowledge of the building, engaged in a relentless fight with Gruber. The battle was intense, with John narrowly avoiding several attacks while landing his own strikes. Gruber, despite his cunning and planning, found himself on the defensive. In a pivotal moment, John managed to outmaneuver Gruber. He exploited a critical weakness in Gruber's defense, creating an opportunity to confront him directly. The fight reached its climax as John and Gruber grappled for control, their movements fueled by desperation and determination. In a final, dramatic showdown, John managed to disarm Gruber and subdue him. As Gruber lay defeated, he glared at John with a mixture of rage and disbelief. "You may have won this time, McClane," Gruber spat, "but you'll never understand the true nature of power." John, breathing heavily and covered in sweat, looked down at his fallen adversary. "Power doesn't mean much when you're faced with justice." As the building's emergency systems were activated and the remaining terrorists were subdued, the final confrontation came to a close. John's victory over Hans Gruber marked the end of a harrowing ordeal, but the impact of the night's events would linger long after the dust settled. With the hostages safe and the terrorists defeated, John McClane's bravery and resilience had triumphed over the forces of chaos. The final battle was over, but the scars and memories of the night would remain, a testament to the courage and determination of those who fought to bring justice and safety to Nakatomi Plaza. With the terrorists neutralized and the hostages rescued, the immediate crisis at Nakatomi Plaza came to an end. However, the aftermath of the event revealed the profound impact of the night's events on everyone involved. The media coverage of the incident was intense. News outlets reported on the dramatic rescue, highlighting the bravery of John McClane and the effectiveness of the police and FBI intervention. The building, once a symbol of corporate success, was now a scene of destruction and chaos, with debris and damage marking the extent of the terrorists' plans. The FBI and local authorities conducted a thorough investigation into the terrorist attack. The operation's success was attributed to the coordinated efforts of law enforcement and John's heroic actions. However, the investigation also revealed gaps in security and preparedness, prompting a review of safety protocols for high-profile buildings and events. For the survivors and first responders, the aftermath was a period of recovery and reflection. Many of the hostages were deeply affected by the trauma they experienced, requiring counseling and support. The police and FBI personnel involved in the rescue faced their own challenges, dealing with the stress and emotional toll of the operation. In the wake of the crisis, John McClane and Holly Gennaro were reunited. Their emotional reunion took place amidst the rubble of Nakatomi Plaza, where the severity of the night's events was still evident. Holly, exhausted but relieved, embraced John with tears of joy and gratitude. The ordeal had tested their relationship, but the shared experience of surviving the attack and the genuine concern for each other brought them closer. The emotional weight of the night was evident in their reunion, but there was also a sense of relief and renewal. "I didn't think I'd see you again," Holly said, her voice trembling with emotion. "I was so scared." John held her tightly, his own emotions on edge. "I'm here now. We're going to get through this, together." Their reconciliation was heartfelt, but it also marked the beginning of a new chapter for their relationship. The trauma of the night had changed them, but it also provided a deeper understanding of each other's strength and resilience. They faced the future with a renewed commitment to their relationship and a shared determination to heal from the ordeal. As the dust settled and life began to return to normal, John McClane took time to reflect on the events that had unfolded. The experience had been a harrowing journey, marked by moments of intense danger and personal sacrifice. John's reflection was a mix of relief and contemplation. He considered the bravery of the hostages, the dedication of the rescuers, and the profound impact of the night's events. The fight against the terrorists had tested his limits, but it had also revealed his strength and determination. The ordeal left lasting scars, both physical and emotional. John's role in the crisis was recognized and praised, but he also grappled with the personal cost of his actions. The experience had taken a toll on him, and he knew that the road to recovery would be long. In conversations with Holly and others, John expressed his thoughts and feelings about the night. The shared experience of facing danger and overcoming adversity brought him closer to those around him. He found solace in the support of his loved ones and the knowledge that he had made a difference. The final chapter of the crisis marked a time of healing and moving forward. John and Holly, along with the other survivors and first responders, began to rebuild their lives, carrying with them the memories of the night but also the strength and resilience gained from it. The aftermath of Nakatomi Plaza was a testament to the courage of those who faced the terror and chaos. The resolution of the crisis brought closure, but it also underscored the enduring impact of the events and the ongoing journey of recovery and reconciliation for everyone involved. In the weeks following the dramatic events at Nakatomi Plaza, John McClane and Holly Gennaro prepared to return to their home in New York. The aftermath of the crisis had left its mark, but the time had come to move forward and find a semblance of normalcy. John, having received recognition and gratitude for his role in thwarting the terrorist attack, was eager to leave behind the memories of the night. He and Holly packed up their belongings and said their goodbyes to the city that had become a battleground. The journey back to New York was filled with a mix of relief and anticipation. The drive was quiet, with the vast landscapes of the American West unfolding before them. The miles seemed to pass by more quickly as they spoke about their plans for the future and the life they hoped to build together. The weight of the past was still present, but it was accompanied by a sense of hope and renewal. Upon returning to New York, John and Holly faced the challenge of rebuilding their lives. The city was a familiar comfort, offering a sense of stability and belonging. They began to settle into their routine, focusing on their personal and professional goals. John, with a newfound perspective on life, decided to take a step back from his demanding job as a police officer. He sought a role that would allow him to make a positive impact without the constant danger he had faced. Holly supported his decision, and together they explored new opportunities and ventures. Holly, having been deeply affected by the events at Nakatomi Plaza, chose to channel her experiences into advocacy and support for others who had faced similar trauma. Her work brought her into contact with survivors and their families, allowing her to provide guidance and compassion. As they adjusted to their new roles, John and Holly also looked forward to the personal milestones they had long hoped for. Their relationship, strengthened by the shared ordeal, became a source of support and joy. They began planning for the future, considering the possibility of starting a family and building a home that reflected their renewed sense of hope. The final moments of the epilogue reflect the promise of a new beginning for John and Holly. The city of New York, with its vibrant energy and endless possibilities, provided a backdrop for their fresh start. The challenges they had faced were behind them, but the lessons learned and the strength gained would guide them as they moved forward. John and Holly took comfort in the knowledge that they had faced their fears and emerged stronger. Their shared experience had forged a deeper bond, and they approached their future with optimism and courage. The scars of the past remained, but they were a testament to their resilience and determination. As they walked hand in hand through the familiar streets of New York, the city's skyline seemed to symbolize their new chapter. The promise of a brighter future and the opportunity to create new memories filled them with hope. They embraced the challenges ahead with confidence, knowing that they had each other and the strength to face whatever came their way. The epilogue closes on a hopeful note, highlighting the power of new beginnings and the enduring strength of the human spirit. John and Holly's journey was a testament to their courage and love, and their future was a canvas waiting to be painted with the colors of hope and renewal.